clean my screen. It's so filthy.
All right. Well, we just hit the record button. So Veda Austin, thank you very much for your time.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, for people who are listening to this on the audio, I should probably let you guys know that this is going to be a very visual heavy podcast episode. So if you would like to jump over to the YouTube channel, it's going to be a more fascinating ride for you to follow. So that's just for the guys on the replay. Veda, we have a traditional first question, and you are for our first time guests, which you are. And that is, Veda, were you a weird kid?
Oh, absolutely. I was definitely weird. One of the interesting things about me was that I had eye surgery twice when I was little, and so I was actually blind for about 3 months. So I had to use all my extra sensory parts of me. So I was very, very sensitive to energy and water and things like this. So when I would get in the bath, I could feel vibrations differently than other people.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's one weird thing. Another weird thing, there were plenty of weird things.
Go for it.
One of the things is that I've never drunk alcohol. I've never done drugs. I've never smoked a cigarette. I've been vegetarian since I was 8. And I had no real knowing as to why I wanted to make those choices, other than that was the choice that I made. And I remember being a teenager, actually being invited to go to a party, and everybody was drinking and like having fun, and I felt all this pressure to do things. So I pretended to be so drunk that I couldn't possibly drink anymore, and then went home. And from what I'm told, it's fairly unusual to not entertain all of those things.
Well, especially, I mean, growing up where you did, I lived in New Zealand for 7 years. Yeah, young Kiwis, like young Australians, they like a bit of a party.
They do. It's an understatement.
Anything else in the, because obviously a show like this, I hope people, not really, but I hope people say things like, oh, and I was abducted by aliens, or my grandmother saw spirits, or so on. When you had your daredevil experience of being hypersensitive to other senses beyond sight, did you encounter presences and so on?
Well, actually, the most unusual thing that I actually have never shared publicly, but I'm getting more and more confident doing it, because it was only in the last few years that I ever shared it, and it might explain some of my connection to water, perhaps, is that I was born with something called reticulating eyelids, which means that, which is why I had eye surgery. It means, you know how cats and sharks have eyelids, like they have that too, the ones that go regularly and ones that go like that. And they were removed when I was 2 days old, and they started to come back when I was 5. And yeah, so essentially I was designed to see underwater.
Yeah.
And
shark spirit, I love it.
So there we go.
Yeah, I like it. That's super interesting. So we've mentioned a couple of times water, for people who are unaware. They would have seen the show title, for instance, but you have quite the journey with it, a fascinating journey. So do you want to take control of the call and
Sure.
talk through your amazing journey?
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, my journey with water, I mean, the thing is that we all forget that we're all bodies of water. And by molecular count, we're 99% water. And that there are more water molecules in our body than stars in the Milky Way. And yet when we look in the mirror with our 4th phase, water eyes, because there are 4 phases, liquid, solid, gas, and a type of gel. That's the kind of water in our cells. We think we're so solid, but we're only a cut away from liquid. We're only an emotion away from liquid, a toilet break away from liquid, and a whole ton of other things away from liquid. And yet we have this view of ourselves as being so solid. And so we already have relationship with water because we are bodies of water. So as that has extended for me, It really started developing from in a very organic way. I was in a horrendous car accident about 20 something years ago. And we went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice. The driver was decapitated. One of the worst accidents in New Zealand where someone actually survived. And over the course,
Whereabouts
sorry,
was that? Was that State Highway 1? Where were you?
yeah, it was on the Dairy Flats.
Right, okay.
So it was before the tunnel, for anyone that's in New Zealand, it was
Right.
before the tunnel was created, and so you had to go the long way around. So I'm going to share just quickly just that what that was, so people can kind of get an idea of just how serious the car accident was.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
completely wrecked.
Wow.
So that was that. And over the course of 20 years, I had 8 operations. And on the 8th operation, the doctors, they were doing bowel surgery, but I didn't recover well. And they found that I had showers of blood clots in my lungs. And after having lived such a holistic life, I was really surprised that this had happened to me. And they fed me the fear, and everyone, it's each to their own. So this was my personal decision, but I did have warfarin for some months, and then they checked everything. They said, well, you're clear, but we'd like you to keep going. But I have a friend who was a medical doctor, and he also practiced Ayurvedic medicine, and he said, look, totally off the record, if you can find a natural, emphasis on natural and not ionized, if you can find a natural high alkaline water, it might help to balance out your body. And so I thought, wow, water, that's so much easier. It's a natural thing, you know. I'm just going to become the guinea pig of my own health, and I'm going to do like 2-week trials on whatever alkaline waters I can find. So there's plenty of alkaline waters that I could find in New Zealand that were alkaline. Is basically from like just a 7.1 up. So 7 is like what distilled water would be. It's a base, it's neutral. Whereas anything under a 7 in pH is acidic. So it goes from 0 to 14. And so I was drinking waters in the range of 7.8, 8, 8.1, this kind of range. And I didn't really know what to expect, because when you're drinking water, essentially, you know, you're not seeing what's happening, you're feeling what's happening. So you feel more hydrated.
When you
And
started on that journey, though, were you doing like water fasts, or were you just adding high alkaline water into your admittedly quite clean, otherwise?
Yeah, no, I was adding it in. So I wasn't doing anything different. I wasn't water fasting. I simply was having a litre in the morning, a litre during the day, and a litre at night, but either side of food, because you shouldn't drink high alkaline water with your food.
Mm-hmm.
So it was half an hour either side. And so, but still, I was feeling hydrated, but I didn't know what to expect. And then I had a wellness center back then, because I also have some gifts of healing. And so this friend of mine, she said, look, I know this old man, he's got his own private water source, and it is a very, very deep aquifer. pH out of the ground is 9.9. He's only giving it to cancer patients. Maybe you want to try. And I'm like, sign me up.
Yeah, when you told Dr. Cowan this, I'm like, because I know New Zealand, without giving me his address, whereabouts was it?
Well, I signed a non-disclosure with him back then, but it's in the North Island, which is surprising, but it's in the North Island in a kind of within the very larger Auckland region.
Oh, really? That is not what I expected. I was
No,
thinking,
I know that's not what I
I
expected
was
either.
thinking like he has a little hut off the desert road. Like I figured it'd be something like that. But
Yeah, well, it's in a more rural area. I mean, Auckland itself is
Sure.
actually massive, and even up in Snell's Beach, it's still considered Auckland. So it extends as far and wide.
I suppose
Anyway,
it does have, like, Auckland has 40-ish volcanoes. So yeah,
yeah,
that's because New Zealand's extremely volcanic. And my guess was, if you're getting 9.9 water straight out of the ground, I was thinking got to be Rotorua, or the desert.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's full of lime and crystal, and lime is what like concrete is made of. So that's why people that have their water in concrete tanks, it's usually more alkaline. because the concrete is essentially made with lime. And so limestone is something that when water filters through it, it helps it to become more alkaline, and certain crystals also and minerals. It's actually what makes water so alkaline naturally is actually usually the minerals that it's in touch with sitting in.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, I go and I see him, and he gives me a month worth of water, and I'm so excited to try it. And so after the day 3, I noticed something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but how, you know, we really are a constipation nation and a constipated world, so much so that people are sitting on the toilet trying to push out a pebble for an hour, and this is just not normal. So we are very dehydrated, and we really, a lot of people just don't like the taste of water because it doesn't taste like anything, because we're conditioned to like everything that is sugary and has a lot of taste. But as you become more and more familiar with water, you'll notice that actually different waters have different tastes and different textures. And so this water had a very sweet taste, and it had a more kind of viscosity about it, and had a great clarity. And so on day 3, I'm like noticing that bowel motions are like really happening, which is an amazing thing after having so much bowel surgery. But on day 10, I noticed something even more unusual. I started to get all these bumps along my arm and along my jaw that were really painful. And I knew my body was detoxing something, but I actually didn't know what. And it's, even though it sounds gross, one of the bumps was so inflamed and large, and it felt like something was like emerging out of it. I'm like, what is happening? I got these tweezers and actually started to, I pulled something out. I found something in my arm and I pulled it out, and it was this little piece of green glass. I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly where that was from. Between day 10 and 12, 27 pieces of glass were purged out of my body, and pretty much nearly all of them were green. The reason they were green was that when I had that car accident, the guy who was driving the car, he had a nightclub, and in the back of the car were crates of Steinlager beer. And although the windscreen also went through my body, I went like this when we started to, when it happened and when it rolled, I suppose. And a lot of that green glass from the back seat rolled and shattered into that side of me. And so I started going, my sciencey hat went on. I'm like, okay, how the heck can water possibly purge me like this?
How long after the accident?
Over 20 years.
So you had the beer glass in your body for 20 years.
Yeah. And I didn't even realize that it was all there. So, I mean, they'd spent days picking all the glass out of my face and body when I was in hospitals, and I'd seen green glass come out. So that's how come I had made that connection, knowing that. But it wasn't just glass that came out of me. When I was a young teenager, I'd got a huge big thorn stuck between my knuckles, and we thought we'd got pretty much all of it out. But this fossilized piece of thorn this extra bit started coming out. I'm like, okay. So then I'm like noticing all these incredible changes. And I had this wellness center that I mentioned. And I thought, well, I wonder if it's a coincidence that I'm having this reaction with this water. And so I ended up trialing all these volunteers on 8-week trials. And although they weren't clinical trials, I conducted them as scientifically as I could. I recorded everybody's information, their weight, all these different kinds of things, asked them the same questions. And everyone across the board, and I did about 90 people or so, and from very, very healthy all the way to extremely sick, and all these unusual and interesting things in between, everyone noticed a difference in their energy. People that were very sick had quite remarkable results. Across the board, everybody's eyesight improved. One person had to change her prescription on her glasses because it changed so dramatically. It helped a lot of people with psoriasis, eczema, and acne. All their skin issues started to clear up. People that have had kind of a mental fog started to become more clear. A lot of weight loss for people that were quite overweight. And we have fat to trap acid. So a lot of people don't realize they're drinking a lot of acidic water as well. And so they're sort of adding to this issue without realizing it. And then, I mean, there was just so many, I'm trying to think of them all, but even depression, which is a really random and interesting one, is that people that had quite bad depression appeared to be improving. So I collected all this information. I'm
And was
looking
this
at it
using
all,
water from the same anonymous
same, the
source? Right.
same,
Yeah.
the same source. And I'm like, okay, there's something here, but what makes it different? And how could it have purged glass out of me? So you know, we tend to look at an analysis. So I was looking through the analysis, being very logical, going, okay, well, you know, maybe it is the bicarb because it's got a high bicarb content. Maybe it's the alkalinity. Maybe it's the pH. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But then I started to realize what I was doing. I was looking at everything that's in water. But water itself is the thing that is absorbing all of those things. It holds it. So water, I have discovered over time, has an energetic kind of blueprint of health. And so water is kind of like an energetic force. It holds all of these things, but water itself can, you know, be completely distilled and still be water.
Mm.
And so it's very interesting when you start to look at that in two separate ways. So I started to study the new science of water, because there is definitely a new science of water out there that a lot of people haven't heard about. And I like to weave science and art and consciousness together. I like to find this incredibly beautiful balance, and I like to honor water in the most well-rounded way that I can. So I'm not too far out one way or too far out the other. I'm something very much in a balanced place. And so firstly, I started to, that was around about that time, this was around about eight or so years ago, when Masaru Emoto first brought his book out, The Messages in Water. And so the science community really weren't embracing his work. However, regardless of that, he still really opened the doorway for people to start recognizing themselves as bodies of water.
Yeah.
His microscopic work was shown in contrast. So he would photograph water that had the word love on it, photograph water that had the word hate on it. By photographing it, I mean he took a little bit of that water, flash froze it, and microscopically took photographs of the structures that formed. The water that for love made beautiful geometries. The water for hate couldn't form structure. And so this visual evidence of what water was, how responsive it was, made its way around the globe. And people started to say, look, thoughts become things. The things that you think actually affect the water within you. And so this was very helpful for many, many people. And that was his gift to the world, I believe. But I was also extremely inspired by a friend of mine whose name is Costa. He is a French photographer. He does photographs very similar to Emoto, in the same similar kind of way, except that his imagery, the photographs that he was taking, the images were not just beautiful geometries. The images I was seeing, and I'm going to screen share to show you what I'm about to say, were actually in pictures.
Yeah.
So rather than it just being like a beautiful hexagon, he was getting images like this. You can see this incredible heart. His book is called Into the Heart of Water. He was also getting faces. So you can see this little happy face in there.
And
this
what
is
was he doing? Like, because Emoto would put the word love or something on it. So what was Laurent doing that was different?
So what he was doing, he had formed relationship with water. So for him, he likes to remain more of the observer and wants water to reveal itself. And I am very much of the same mind. There is a lot of this term and word of influence and programming that is thrown around a lot, especially in scientific areas. Whereas Laurent is very much more interested in allowing water to simply reveal what it wants to share. And that's what I admired about him. It wasn't all about influence. It was about allowing water to show its and reveal its own sort
Well,
of
so
communication.
for Emoto's work to actually work, right? It means that that's a capacity of water, which means water is doing that whether humans are putting it in a bottle with the word love on it or not. And that's,
Yeah.
it's almost the, I remember being transfixed by Emoto stuff when it came out as well. But it's almost eerier in a good way when you look at the kind of stuff Laurent and you're doing, which is like water's on its own journey. Like we're in its
Yeah.
journey, it's not in ours. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, I know what you mean. And it's nice to hear somebody say that, because a lot of people get a little bit stuck in the other kind of way of thinking, I found. So I took all of these two influences and these two incredible people, and then I also kind of married it with one other inspiring person who is not around today, but he was a radionic engineer, and he's got a very cool name. His name was Thomas Hieronymus,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was a radionic engineer. And he had, because I'm a researcher, I can find all these really interesting old pieces of information. And he had written down an observation that when he went into a Parisian meat market, he observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind them where they were placed. For example, the heart organ appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze in the shape of the actual heart organ. Same thing with the liver, same thing with the brain. It was creating imagery in the shape of these organs. And his idea was that even though the animal was no longer alive and that these organs were separate from the animal, there was some kind of life force energy that was still impacting the way the frost froze, because there's water in blood. And that was a very, very interesting thing for me, because it came back to that imagery again. And so back then I didn't have a microscope. And I'm like, well, I really want to test this for myself, because I'm very self-inquiring. And so I'm like, well, I have some fantastic water and I have some petri dishes. So I'm going to set some kind of an intention and I'm going to freeze it, because the common thread between these three things, the three people's work, was that water reveals its information in the freezing process. So this is my very rudimentary first idea. So I got my petri dish of water and I was going to set some intention. But before I did that, I noticed that there was some fluff in the water. And I'm like, God. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any
Ah.
impact on the water's memory. That was my conscious thought. I'm like, well, that'll do. Put it in the freezer, and had zero expectation of what I would see, because I knew everybody else's work was microscopic. But I'm like, oh, well, it's not, we'll just see what happens. So a few hours later, I was like, oh, yeah, we'll go back and have a look. So I pulled it out of the freezer. This is just my common freezer, at home. Held it up to the light, and I'm like, oh, my God. I took a photograph on it on my phone. And I'm looking at this photo, and I say to my son, Rama, I'm like, Rama, what's this? And he goes, it's a hand, Mum. I'm like, I know. But it was like half the size of the petri dish, and in macroscopic terms, this is huge. So I'm going to start the journey of these photos now. Can
Please
you,
do.
had I been stuck before on screen share?
No. You've
Are
been
we?
bouncing
Okay.
in and out really well. So if you want
Okay.
to hit screen share,
I'm not on screen share now?
no, hit the button and you're good to go.
Okay. All right. Let's
And
do
while you're doing
this.
that, before I forget, two things, and bearing in mind neither of us are giving health advice here, do you
No.
still drink high alkaline water? And are you aware if people get similar health effects from alkalizing their own water?
Hmm. I have, when I'm in New Zealand, that's the
Yeah,
water that I drink.
cool.
And I'm very fortunate that I formed a relationship with the owner, and that I'm able to. It's not freely available because people always say, "How can I get it?"
Yeah, sure.
But one very easy thing to do, that as far as alkaline, to make your water slightly more alkaline, is to add half a teaspoon of baking soda to it, and that immediately makes the water around an 8.3, which is about the pH of baking soda. It doesn't always, it doesn't taste so great, but it does actually, there are benefits in baking soda, and
Yeah, totally.
it does really make a difference. But I always recommend to people that they find a natural high alkaline spring water. And, you know, an 8 is actually not hard to find, and they're pretty good. But I always say, if you can find water that's actually contained in glass, that's fantastic, because there's been some studies proven as well that actual glass helps to make the water have slightly higher viscosity.
Yeah.
So I that's what I do. I personally drink, and I can say that many people have found great benefit from drinking a slightly more alkaline water. I really can't give any health advice like you were
Of course.
saying.
Yeah. But
But
people who wanted to, so the bicarb soda is quite good. So if people wanted to, because they have health issues, and it's actually not going to harm you. Again, not health
yeah,
advice, but you could
no.
do the liter in the morning of high alkaline water if you just got, you know.
Yeah, when I was doing the trials with people, all they had was a liter in the morning, not all at once. That's like 3 glasses essentially, about half an hour before they have breakfast, and then about half an hour or so after they've had dinner, before they go to bed. People might think, "Oh God, I'll be getting up peeing all night," but actually, it didn't seem to work that way.
Well, it's a different structure. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not passing it through. It's actually
absorbing
impacting
into the
that
cells.
gel phase, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly,
All right.
exactly. So this is the photograph, as you can see, of my hand. And what was really kind of freaky for me when I saw this, outside of it being looked like an X-ray almost, was that my fingers are actually really, really crooked, and so the hand
It
has
was
crooked
specifically
fingers
your
as
hand.
well.
It wasn't just a hand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
And so then I thought, okay, well, I mean, if any water is going to be informed as such, it's going to be seawater. Back then, I lived in Omaha Beach,
Oh, very
and so
nice.
I went and got some seawater, and I put a really thin layer of it in the petri dish, because seawater freezes much slower than fresh water, and I didn't want to put too much in there. And so I had still no expectations, still thinking, or maybe it was a coincidence, but I got this photograph of this fish in the ice, and you can see his like tail and the shape of the fish and his fins and his perfectly round eye. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is crazy. Like, part of me was freaking out, going,
Yeah.
what the heck? Because this is kind of a big deal, that water is actually a designer.
Yeah.
But it's not surprising, because I think it's the architect of life, because it's what fills us and gives us shape and form. It's like, think about plums and prunes. A plum is full and round and fully hydrated, but it completely changes form and shape and structure when it's dehydrated and becomes a prune.
Absolutely. It's also,
This was,
we find it cosmically, right? So we
yes.
have in Andean beliefs, you have the mother of the waters as sort of the creator of all things. And
Mm-hmm.
in Vodun or West African beliefs, the world is kind of sitting atop an ancestral sea, and that's where, you know, the dead go and come back. And it is our structural origin, as you just said. Like we
Mm-hmm.
understand that spiritually, and it's fascinating to see it show up in a domestic freezer.
That's right. This one was from seawater, from looks like a whale, obviously. And so I started to think about, okay, so was also when my freezer became my most used household item. And I kind of started going crazy. I was just taking photograph after photograph after photograph. And I was thinking of all different kinds of ways of interacting with water. And so I'm like, okay, well, water seems to love to show imagery. How about I interact with it and get a photograph of my friend? And so this little range here I'm giving you, this is a little snippet of images that have been the
So good.
influence. So this is my friend Wendy, and I used her photograph. I put my petri dish of water on top of her photo for 30 seconds. Froze it using my technique. So my technique shifted and changed and evolved over time. It went from completely freezing the water to starting to understand that I was missing something important. As I got to know more about the latest science of water, I was following a lot of my mentor and dear friend now, Dr. Gerald Pollack's work, and he talks about the fourth phase of water.
Yeah.
And he's been very supportive of what I'm doing and given me some fabulous ideas to help it to be as scientific as I can possibly make it. And so I started to realize that when water is in an in-between stage, the stage between liquid and ice, that is when it's in its formation. It's sort of in this process of creation. It's kind of when it's becoming this liquid crystal, because when ice is formed, it's essentially a mineral because it has the same lattice-like molecular order as a crystal does. And so there's a special magical place in between. And so as I started to do this, I realized that there are two types of water in water, because I kept pulling the petri dish out of the freezer earlier and earlier to see at what stage it was at. So this is a very organic way of me observing what water likes to do. What I found was that under 5 minutes, water will actually adhere to the bottom of the glass petri dish. I found glass works much better than plastic. And it starts to form this crystalline architecture. And there is the uninformed water. So it's informed water and uninformed water. Informed water is making the architecture on the bottom of the petri dish. Uninformed water stays liquid on the surface much, much quicker. I mean, slower. So it stays, so there's like an ice and a liquid. There's two. So I actually only photograph the informed water, and I get much more of a 3D look. And the reason I think that glass works better than plastic is because glass is also made of silica, and so silica is a crystal, and it's helping to store that information. So what you can see is, I'm just going to show you. So this was completely frozen, and this is using my technique. You can see there's quite a big difference. But what you also see is that you've got, Wendy's profile beautifully designed in ice. I'm like, oh, okay, so let's look at other people.
You were just talking about informed and uninformed water. Do you know, does water lose its information? So let's say, with the picture of Wendy here, if you unfroze it and refroze it and so on, does it lose the information?
I just, it's funny you should ask. I just done that test for a company, because one of the other things I do is that people will send me their restructuring technology, and I'll actually photograph it, because tap water, for example, always has the same kind of structures. It's disordered, it has lines and dots, and it looks a certain way. We'll use their technology, and often it will restructure it, reorder it, and it will have a specific kind of new pattern. But I just let that melt and froze it again, and let that one melt and froze it again. And it's interesting because it actually held its patterns, and it's not common to do that. But it's a little bit like homeopathy. The more you dilute it, the stronger it is. And so
that's interesting.
Believe that actually it's very interesting. It is very interesting. But also I think that there really are two types of water, even in people. I personally think, and this is all my personal observations and thoughts, but I think we have this kind of bulk water, essentially, which is always kind of moving around. It's the stuff that actually excretes out of us, and it's in kind of this constant kind of motion. But then there's this more concentrated, informed water, of which is like a school of molecular fish, which moves very intentionally and is holding very dear memories I
Okay.
kind of feel like water is like awareness, and it's the salt in our body, because we're essentially water, salt, minerals, and consciousness. And salt is a crystal. Crystals are in all our technology. They store vast amounts of information. If you took all the salt out of the human body, you'd be dead in 48 hours, probably sooner, and you wouldn't be able to perform any action whatsoever. Salt is electrical as well. So salt and water have this incredible marriage, and this is part of what forms life. But I think it's also that water is awareness, and salt, when you add salt, it stores and holds memory. So there is this interesting connection between the two, which is not to be ignored. So I think that water is the constant observer, but when it comes into contact with the salts, it then becomes also able to store that information in an interesting, well, very sophisticated way. So moving on, this is, I used this photo of my friend Igor. He's a scientist. He was very interested in my work, and I took a snapshot of him when he was talking at the water conference in 2019. And he said I could use his photo, and so I put the petri dish of water on top of his photo for 30 seconds, used my technique, and you can see his very clear profile. He's got very different features, obviously, than Wendy, but you can see that they're captured in the ice. My friend Laurent Costa that we talked about
That
earlier,
one's so good.
yeah, he sent me his photograph, and he said, "Can you please show my photo to the water?" And you can see that it has taken his profile
It's
beautifully.
like the water's sketching him. Do you know what I mean? It's
It
sort of, it actually
is,
understands Laurent and says, I'm going to sketch you. I'm being
yeah.
facetious in a funny way, but when I saw these slides that you showed, some of these slides you showed Dr. Cowan, it reminded me of Ghostbusters 2. It's like water is playing with you. It's the sort of ectoplasm responding and responding intelligently to your interactions with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I call it, I don't particularly like the word experiment, because I am a body of water that does not want to be experimented on. So I think of it more of co-creation,
Yeah.
because I think I'm the medium and water is the artist, and that I am having so much in the way of a response that I can't say that it's just my work at all anymore.
Absolutely.
There's an active participant that's with me doing this work, and that is the intelligence
Well,
of water.
there is an intelligence here because it looks like Laurent and it is referencing the photo, but it's not like a photocopy, right?
Exactly,
There's an
exactly.
intelligence that says like, oh, this is Laurent, so I'm going to show you
Yes.
Laurent. That's amazing.
That's right. And every single time it's as if there's a different artist, but it's painting or designing the same thing, because I will show you in those repeat studies that I've done shortly. But I wanted to see how sophisticated water might get. And so on the, over here is a photograph of my daughter Shanti's braid that I'd done. So I printed that out and I put the petri dish of water on top of her photograph for 30 seconds. And you can see this incredibly complex braid is revealed in the ice. And from an artistic point of view, it is very difficult to draw a braid. You have to get the shading right and all of this. But when you consider that this was liquid water, when it went into the freezer and it came out like this, it's pretty remarkable. Then I wanted to see if it would do it again. So I did 3 separate different tests at different times using the same photo of my daughter's braid. And you can see that there is these braids in every single one, but it's as if a different artist designed them. But the idea was, it's as if someone said, okay, draw a braid, and everyone got together and drew different things, but the braid itself is still there.
The first one looks better. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
Is there an element potentially, as you say, different artists, but also an element of potentially confusion there, where the water's trying to be like, but I've showed you this. Do you know what I mean?
It's highly possible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like it's free flowing. And so it's able to do whatever the heck it wants.
Yeah.
And I just think, well, okay, I mean, there's definitely braiding, but it's completely different. So it's as if it's like looking at things from different angles. And I'll show you with this one. So I did the same thing, except I did these all at the same time, and it might be relative to that. So I printed this hieroglyphic tablet out and put 3 petri dishes of water on top of it. And they're all slightly different, but you can tell they're very similar. But what I've observed, the more I do this, it's as if water looks at it from all kinds of different angles. So that's almost like what it did in this one here, is like looking at braids from all different angles.
I've never seen the underside of a braid, right? Like, it's impossible. So
yeah, and so that's actually what I've observed quite a lot, in that when I do these repeat studies, it's not always the way, but more often than not, it looks at things from different angles, which is very interesting. So then this one, you can see I had actually took a photo of the process. So I was studying electrical conductivity, and I really liked this picture I came across, so I printed it out, and you can see the response in the ice over here. I used Van Gogh's sunflower picture as the influence, and this is the response in the ice. Then we're kind of just going through the different ways that I've played with water. I'm liking the word influence less and less and less at this point, because influence makes it feel like I'm influencing the water, whereas water, I believe, is much more actually choosing to play and choosing to show me. But for lack of a better word, we can use that for now. This one's pretty neat. I had been invited to a wedding, and so I put the petri dish of water on top of the wedding invitation. It didn't actually have any rings on the invitation. The largest word on the invitation was wedding, which is what I sat the petri dish of water on top of. And it is as if water has designed a wedding ring for that image, for that response, which I found really interesting. And lots of people going forward, they ask me, well, what if you use a different language? Can water understand all these different languages? So to honor my Latin teacher, Mrs. Barlow, that I love dearly, and I always remember one of the things she said, if you don't know your history, you'll be condemned to repeat it. So she was just the darling. So I used the word pugione, which means dagger in Latin, and we got a dagger. That was also influenced the idea of the dagger. My son and I were talking about daggers, and it kind of ended up kind of organically happening from there. But my daughter also plays an active role in doing these co-creations with me. And so she wrote the word unicorn because she loves everything to do with unicorns and fairies and magic. And this looks a little bit like a scene out of the movie Frozen. You can see the mane of the unicorn, and the unicorn horn, and his face and his eye and his neck. And she did this whole test herself. I just helped her take the photo. I wrote the word angel.
Oh, that's great, that one.
Yeah, and you can see the form of the angel and her wings. I find this really interesting purely because I think it's very, very complex. I wrote the word artificial intelligence and placed the petri dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, froze it, and brought it out. It is such an unusual thing to see in the ice. It looks 3D, and it kind of reminds me of Elon Musk's Neuralink device that he's kind of put together, but it's very, very interesting and unusual. For this one, there was the word I just printed it out because I thought it was kind of cool. I printed this out, I put the petri dish of water on top of it, and it's kind of designed the word. So next, it's the influence of thought. So this is not any physical influences. So this is simply me.
And this is all the same process, isn't it? This is all like at a macro level with a domestic.
All macro, all taken on my iPhone.
Yeah.
Every one of these is taken on my phone. So my son did this. His name is Rama, and we were talking about Lord Rama, and Lord Rama always has a bow and arrow. And so he was like, let's see if it'll show me an arrow. That's actually all he thought. And then he got this beautiful, he did this all himself, he even took the photo, this is my son's thought of an arrow. And so these next ones I'll show you, I was thinking of a shooting star, and I was thinking of the man in the moon.
Amazing. And for that, like, how long did you where the people who listen to the show, many of them are very familiar with Lynn McTaggart's intention experiments and process and so on. Was this like 5 seconds of thinking man in the moon, or was there more to it?
Yeah. Nope. A lot of people get really kind of fixated around how long something should take, but I think water is actually a quantum force. It actually already knows what I'm thinking even before I think it.
Well, it's funny, like moving away from influence to a word like engagement. What is happening here is water, which is you, is playing with water, which is not you, but it's all the one water. So it's
Exactly.
funny, you hit the descriptive challenges right away, don't you? Which is,
yeah,
influence is the wrong word, because water's doing this to itself.
it is, but that's the whole point.
Yep.
I mean, I actually think that what I pose this question to people, like, what if water is expressing its consciousness through you and every living thing on this planet, so it can observe itself from every single different perceivable and inconceivable perspective.
And whatever came here to do that, because I saw it on your website, but I was going to bring it up, which is we don't have a decent scientific model for how water came to be on Earth, and not, as far as we can tell, in a useful form in most of the other planets in the solar system. And it came from space. Like, it's literally an alien, as you said. So it's an alien intelligence
substance
exploring itself.
Absolutely, and that's fact. That's not woo
even
out there or
exactly.
anything.
That's not.
Yeah. It's said to have come on asteroids, and there were different asteroids, so it's got different energetic properties around the world as well. When you think about this,
but they all had to converge on here. And so I've had people on the show who are very like Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe, who does a lot of work about like off-planet genomic information, like viruses and bacteria, and the sort of panspermia effect of how life started here in the first place. But people don't get, when I say the model doesn't work, is all we know is that water came from space, but there's too much water for it to be one incident. So like the vanishingly unlikely scenario that is like mainstream science's best guess is that, you know, millions of like ice balls, snowballs, if you will, dirty snowballs, hit this one planet moving at tens of thousands of miles an hour, right? That's improbable. That doesn't happen in a universe that doesn't have intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next is media. So it's the interaction with media. So I play with my children a lot and with this work, and my son was like, oh, let's do Batman, the Dark Knight, because we all understand how influenced we are as bodies of water from the media, from all different kinds of media. And so I'm like, okay, so this sounds cool.
That could be a poster.
Yeah, yeah, I am planning on doing an exhibition of some of my work at some point. Yeah, but anyway, the petri dish of water was literally sitting on the couch watching Batman, and that was the image. Same thing with Lord of the Rings. You can see the ring. This one was from Jaws.
Wow.
And I like this one because it's very detailed. So this was when water was sitting in front of my laptop. I say watching because I think of water as kind of omnisensory, essentially, because it seems to be able to observe everything, and even the things that are not seen, and this image is one of those. I'll explain why I say that in a sec. Is that you can see two pigs. I've outlined them here. So the document it was just on YouTube. It was this pig that was escaping from a truck, that was a moving truck that was being taken to an abattoir. And the nice thing is the pig actually was okay, and some nice people ended up taking it home, looking after it. The pig is actually fine now. But what is interesting is that you can see this first pig here, and it is definitely defined, but below it you can see there's a second pig, and the second pig was not visible in the actual YouTube video, and it's as if the actual water has perceived something that we couldn't see. It perceived that there was a second pig that most likely wanted to actually follow the first one that actually did escape. And this was really interesting to me. I'm like, okay, this is almost a kind of evidence that water is being able to actually perceive more than we can see. And I think it does that all the time. So this is evident in this particular picture, whereby you can see my very rudimentary test. I have a butter knife on top of this petri dish. These things were just in the background, these coasters, but you can see that water has picked the coasters up as well as the butter knife, which I kind of think is also very relative to the image before of the pigs, where it's showing that it can see things that are actually, you know, also that's not part of the intention.
Yes, I like that, because this one, you took that photo, so obviously your eyes saw that, but your awareness was on the knife, right?
Yes.
So this demonstrates that what it's not doing, although it is, as well as other stuff, what it's not doing is just reading your mind, which has looked at a picture and playing it back. What we see here is it has its own perspective on what happened. It's because that's kind of fascinating. It's like, well, what is it actually doing? Because as you say, it's a very and delightfully rudimentary setup. You've got an iPhone and a domestic freezer, right? So is the water that you arrange, this answers the question of whether the water that you're putting in the freezer is reading your mind, which has a picture of the picture in it, or if it's understanding the picture, right? Because this is sort of more in the, it's got its own view of things, because they were just you just didn't move them out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I love the way that you think and what you share. It's very much in alignment with everything that I think and do. So this one was pretty cool. I just put an uncut amethyst crystal in there for a short time, and then the reason that you see different colors appear in my work is because I only put a thin layer of water in the petri dish and I hold it up to light. I'm doing it at home, so depending on what colors are coming through, you'll see them, and I like it because it adds to the artistic aspect of it.
So these are funny, because when I asked earlier about does the imprinted water hold an imprint, I was actually thinking about crystals, because it would be interesting. I don't know if you've done the test, like with crystal water, how long it holds the intelligence of the crystal.
I have actually, and I mean, I've done, and by doing that, it's like the letting it melt, then freezing it again, letting it melt. So, and actually crystals hold vast amount. It really does interact beautifully with crystals. And I mean, I have only done it 4 times so far as the melting and freezing goes, but at each time it has actually been able to hold information well. That it kind of is very much in alignment with homeopathy. So
we're talking about, you know, as you say, field effects here one way or the other, because I'm very interested. You mentioned people, I'm very interested in people like Lynn McTaggart and Dr. Dean Radin, and people who do the kind of this sort of exploration, because research, as you say, isn't quite right. And it has to, it's more likely that there is one explanation, or one understanding is a better term, for all of that stuff, rather than there being individualized one. That kind of like bitsy thinking is very 19th century. So that's why I'm very interested in how long it would last. What's the longest, rather than freeze and refreeze and so on, what's the longest you've left a water that's imprinted and come back to it to see if it's, do you know what I mean? Like not abandon it, but like do a crystal water and leave it on a shelf for a month, and then. Oh,
I see what you mean. Oh, I see what you mean. Well, actually, I've done that test multiple times. I've left water which has had like a quartz crystal sitting in it for well over a year, and I I've done multiple tests like that, and it actually seems to improve with time as
That's
opposed to
cool.
degrade.
Yeah.
So I can, yeah, if I find them, I can share them with you later.
Wonderful.
This one you can see it's pretty clear. So I just popped that on there, the razor, and you can see it's designed. This I like too. So you can just see this. I use the broccoli water, and it's
Yeah,
designed a
very
beautiful
cool.
broccoli. This one's close to my stomach because I love chocolate.
Oh, you got to have some vices, Vita. You don't
Oh my
drink, you don't
God.
smoke.
No, I don't. But I love cups of I love hot drinks. So my favorite hot drink is an oat milk hot chocolate. So, but you can see it's pretty cool how it's designed a chocolate bar.
And
I
you
like,
recognize the brand. Very good.
yeah,
Obviously, Water's a fan of Whitaker's as well. It should be.
exactly. I like this because it shows the engagement. I love that word. I'm going to start using that and change everything from influence. Thank you for sharing that idea with me. This one is cool. So it's one of the most funny requests that this lady at this cafe must have had. So I went to this cafe and I noticed that there was this cute schnauzer dog, it looked like this guy over here, that was drinking from the dog bowl they had out for the dogs. And I noticed there was some left, and I said to the lady, do you mind if I get a takeaway cup and just use the rest of the dog bowl water? And she's like, I don't know what she thought, but anyway, it's like, okay. And all I did was bring it home and freeze it, and you can see it's almost like an etching. It's pretty beautiful. This one, my cat Jiva, he's participated in lots of my co-creations, and he's just looking at the petri dish, and you can see his little face and his little nose and his little eyes and his ears. This one's interesting because what's different about this, and I haven't shared this on any podcast yet, even though it's in my book, is that I don't remember exactly what season it was, but the monarch butterfly season, when all of the caterpillars are out there eating the swan plants. I found this monarch butterfly caterpillar, and I had my petri dish with no water in it. And so I popped the little caterpillar on the petri dish, and he just walked around for a little bit, and then I put him back on his swan plant and left him alone. I came back inside and put a little bit of water in the petri dish. So the actual animal, the caterpillar, hadn't actually touched the water I used, but it had touched the glass petri dish. So the information had actually been shared onto or into the petri dish and then informed the water, which is really interesting because you can see that this little monarch butterfly caterpillar is in there, and you can see his markings and everything like that. So I found that I did that with worms, same exact thing I did with 2 worms, and I got 2 worms in the actual ice example as well. The next one is really fun because all I do was talk to water, and I'm right out on the edge anyway, so there's nothing stopping me from doing anything,
Well,
right?
you're among the right people, honestly.
Oh, good. So I'm like, okay. I said to water, do you know who I am? And froze it. That was it. This is how I write my initials. This is water's response to my question. And in fact, it's improved. It's improved my initials. I've also, although I haven't popped them in here, I've also said hi to water and got the written word hi back
Very cool.
twice. And for this one, I said shalom.
Oh, that's excellent. Look at that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So many people think it looks like an archangel or Yeshua. I said to water, do you see me? I like this response. It's really fun. It's like, oh yeah. I said the word Maui to the water. Yeah, and so for anyone that doesn't know Maui, he essentially was a Maori legend or story about a man who fished up the North Island with his grandmother's jawbone, which was made into a fishing hook. This one is very beautiful. So my mother, she passed away in 1999. The photo on the right is of my mum and I. And so I said to the water, can you connect to my mum? And so when I used to live in Japan back in the day before emails and all of this, mum and I would write letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, she would attempt to do a circle. Her circles were terrible, and she'd be the first to tell you that. And they looked more like misshapen rotis. And she'd always do a little heart in the middle. And this was the response that I got in the eyes.
Because you specifically said, can you connect? Right?
Yes.
So water shared the actual idea of connecting with your mother. Like that's, because it's brilliant.
It's beautiful. And I did that a year later and I got the same response. So I love this. So I love music. I think music is a medicine. And my son actually really said something that really impacted me. So Masaru Emoto, he showed images of music, and he showed that, or it kind of suggested, so everything he did was very much in contrast, but he only really did classical music and heavy metal. They're very extreme. And I doubt that the person that was doing the test liked heavy metal either.
I'm very interested in that, because the effects of like Baroque music on children still in the womb and so on, they are done by people who prefer, and it's not that there's anything, I like Baroque music, but I couldn't agree more. It's like,
I'm with you. And so I'm like, I want to be able to look at all different genres of music. But my son said this, he said, okay, Mum, but like, if water only likes classical and I'm not listening to heavy metal, and I like rap, does that mean that like, the water doesn't like it? And I'm like, no, I don't believe that that's actually what it means. I think water is a dancer and it expresses.
I think water,
and
like
it's
ceremony.
Not judging.
I think water like ceremony. So if you're enjoying music, and that is ceremony, right? It's going to respond to that. If you're forced to listen to death metal and you don't like it, the water that is you is not going to have a good time.
That's it. That's right. But one thing about water, and why I really stand for water, is that it's non-judgmental. It's transparent. It doesn't know color, creed, religion, all these different kinds of things, or any of that. It enters the body of an ant as easily as it'll enter the body of a tree or a person or a king or anyone. So it actually is really simply in a very non-judgmental, non-labeling kind of incredible force, which is the thing I love so much about water. It's very unifying. So in here we've got children that were singing London Bridge is Falling Down, and it looks like one of the towers, so the other one probably already fell down. Here's smoke on the water. It kind of looks like smoke slowly moving through fluid. Papa was a Rolling Stone. It looks like Rolling Stones. Single Ladies, Beyonce. You can see the ring, because the main verse in the song is like, if you like it, then sure to put a ring on it. And then this is like Fly Like an Eagle, and then Marry Me. So it's interesting how water, what I can only call it intelligence, because the evidence is so blindingly obvious, is that when water even represented the wedding ring, when there was no wedding ring to be seen, it was the word wedding. And for this, it's like marry me, and it's creating a heart. It's very, very interesting that it's doing this. I used the sound of Om, and these are at different times. So you can see that this is a very strong pattern, very, very similar images for each one. And so that sound, I used tuning forks that were tuned to the mid-tone of Om for every single test. This is from the song Stairway to Heaven, and all of these were taken at very different times over the course of a year and a bit. So the water has decided to pick up on the word stairway. So you can see what looks like ladders or stairways in every single image. And this is very interesting. So it can pick up on words, it can pick up on sound vibrations, it can be very literal. And so in my arrogance, I thought, oh, well, what if I do a sound of a gong? Surely it's going to look like om. And so water is always playing with me and going, oh, don't get too confident. And so it decided to
I love it.
design a gong, with a mallet on top. I'm like, okay, just stay open to anything. I thought I would share this with you. This is what I've observed over quite a long period of time. This is kind of, I suppose, more of the sciencey aspect to some of the other stuff that I do with water. It's this kind of chart that I've put together. It's more complex. This is a simplified one of water's energetic state of health. Because what I always say to people, if they are going to get involved in doing some of this work too, and I'm starting to really encourage people to do that, is to observe what water does naturally first. So when you do that, you start to realize how extraordinary it is that water can design in imagery, because it's almost defying what it does naturally. So in this little chart we've got, I use kind of these kinds of words from an emotional perspective, because why I think that water has an emotional state of health is that you can have tap water, for example. This is what I would normally see in tap water. It's gone through right angles. When water goes through right angles, it loses an electron, so therefore it doesn't hold the same amount of structure. Yeah,
Very interesting.
that's why it doesn't like right angles. It likes to vortex. And so when water's gone through a lot of trauma, essentially, that's why I say it's got feeling pain, it becomes very disordered. And then where I was going with that is that you can take tap water, and this is the example, and then you can do something, for example, like play it in a singing bowl, or you can say a prayer to it, and you can see that it will restructure. I'll go into these later. But the fact that it can change form and structure is very interesting, but it still holds the chemicals, essentially, or the heavy metals that are in tap water. So if water itself can structurally change, although it still is composed of the same things that are in it, the thing that's changing is more of an energetic state. So its energy is structurally changing.
I know you've been on Tom's show. We had his co-author Sally Fallon Morell on a book launch last year, and she was talking about water and vortex water and so on. I kind of explained, we're still, although this is changing, we're still in town water here, but we have a triple distillation charcoal reservoir. And she said if it's somewhere that it can hear birds and so on, and we're in a rural context, and so we're doing as good as we can with it, but the water that we consume is enjoys where it is. I make it as enjoyable as possible for the water for these kind of reasons. It's just, and drinking it out of the reservoir allows you to be it's an active awareness of when you're doing it, rather than just, oh, I've just come out of the gym, I'm thirsty, and go to the tap. It sort of ceremonializes it. So I've definitely noticed experientially a version of what you're showing on this slide, I guess.
Oh, I love that. So this is water in its healthy state. So I'll try to. So you forms this very beautiful hexagonal ferning that you see, and the larger the hexagon in the petri dish, the healthier the energetic state of water is as it goes through right angles. So this is after it's gone through a couple of right angled pipes. You see it becomes a flower, and then more pipes, it becomes a leaf. More pipes again, it becomes like grass. Then it stops forming natural shapes and it starts to become disordered. Torches is after it's been sitting next to a 4G tower for 15 minutes.
Yikes.
Brain dead after sitting next to the same tower for half an hour. The interesting thing about the brain dead one is that the water is actually thickened, so you can no longer you can barely see the colors through it, because there's a thickening that happens, and it's very unusual. And I only ever see that in this kind of way, which is strange. And this flat line, it's not actually dead, because you can't kill water. It's always in one of its states. You can pollute it, and you can actually like flatline its energetic state of health, but it will always reincarnate back by evaporation. But this is after being in a microwaved oven for a minute.
Wow.
So you can really see what that does to water. Then
I'm
you
going to
can
show
see
this
it.
to my boomer parents, because we don't have a microwave. We haven't had a microwave in many years, right? But
Yes.
they'll still use a microwave to make like tea, and I'm like, don't stop doing that.
No, please don't do that. So for this, so there we go from here. And then we start using, these three are in physical modalities. So this was, I think I used a vortexing machine. You start to see that it starts to come a little bit more alive again. It's getting some form. This was after putting water in a Tibetan singing bowl and playing it. Its sort of circulation starts to come back. This one was after doing the same thing, but filtering it through silk and using ultraviolet, sorry, not ultraviolet, what's the other one that you see in the dark? Infrared light.
Okay.
Sorry, on this. Memory returns, because if you remember back here, what we were looking at was this kind of hexagonal shape. So you see the little guy starting to form over here. Now these four, they all have shifted structure because of different types of emotional conscious connections. So this was me just holding it to my heart. I had a bottle of water that was in trauma, essentially. I held it to my heart and poured some into a petri dish, and this is, you start to see it's getting this natural leaf shape back. Going back here, you see leaves. These are all natural formations that look like something in nature. This was from a Hawaiian prayer, which essentially in English is saying, you know, I love you, please forgive me, I'm sorry. And so these were all, you know, very traumatized structural waters, but what you see is like a leap of faith, not leap of faith, but a leap of health change. So you see slow progress here with like vortexing and various things, but you see great progress here with intention and thought. And so this one was when 60 or 63 or 64 people from around the world all sent their intention and loving thoughts and prayers to the very sad petri dish of water in my house. And health returns, and you see this beautiful hexagonal shape. It was actually quite large. And this came because my children and I were not just sending love to the water, but simultaneously we were sending love to each other. And that, I think, is extremely important.
That's very much like Lynn McTaggart's intention research, which it would be, because as we kind of said before, it makes sense. It feels correct that there is one explanation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is it's field effects is what we're talking about. Yeah.
That's the one. And very lastly, I've been working on creating something which I call hydroglyphs, which are a little bit like hieroglyphs, except in an ice form. So because I've done so many repeat studies now on certain words and certain emotions, these ones are cool because we haven't covered the emotional aspect very much. So when I project the feeling of love, I get hearts. I've got actually so many more of these now, but here we go. And then this is the feeling of stress. And for me, stress feels kind of prickly.
Yeah.
And spiky.
Spiky and busy.
And so you can see that.
It's cool.
Yeah. So then I projected the feeling of heartache, which is kind of more complex. It kind of involves love and stress. And so water very intelligently put them together and put like a little heart and these like stress spikes. And so there we have it. I mean, that's just amazing. A little bit of the amount of work, but it gives you some insights.
That's stunning. It's stunning. Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll talk about the book in a second, obviously, but it sort of begs the question. I'm looking forward to this. And feel free to, using this metaphor correctly, push the boat out. Veda, what is water?
I think that water That's a great question. I think water is, and I've said it before, I think water is an energetic force. I don't think of it just as a fluid, because it's actually much more than that. It's not just only a fluid, it's also, you know, in the air.
Yeah.
It's in all these different forms. I think for me, water is a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
Personally, because it holds me to my integrity. It won't make imagery if I am in a very low vibration. If I'm sad, it's
That's
fine.
interesting.
It's very
Yeah.
compassionate. But if I am feeling very stressed, or the energy isn't quite right, it will not. It simply refuses to entertain me at all. And if I get, so it holds me to stay to my best integrity.
Yeah. So that's,
And
like, magically speaking, as I'm sure you know, um, when you talk about the four classical elements, water is the element of emotion, right? So when you're talking about it as a spiritual teacher, and it won't respond if you're not in the right vibration, it's one of the things that it feels like we as mankind, because we're water, have sort of always known. Like, I like that it's a force, and you're right, like, because when we say what is water, our first thought is, well, it's this liquid combination of two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, except it's not liquid. Like, it's only liquid when it wants to be. So it's not even. It's when I have people like yourself, and I had a guy who's very good at light therapy, and I asked him the same question: what is light? And he's like, this, we kind of don't know. Yeah, we get to an almost classical element level, and it invites you to have a non-materialist understanding, because that's what it's teaching. Things like fire, things like water, they're not, like Gurdjieff said, that when you burn wood, that was actually the light of the sun returning to the sun, because obviously plants and everything else are made of, it's like slow moving sunlight. And when you burn fire, when you have a fire, right, that's the sunlight returning, and it's not wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's the same. It's the same with, like,
exactly.
water.
But
Yeah.
I also think that water is fluid consciousness, a
Okay.
fluid awareness. So that is actually on another level how I perceive water to be, is awareness, the observer. And so I feel the fluid part is simply because it is always moving. It's in flow, always going back. The liquid water is always going back to source, and anything that's taking us closer to source is taking us actually on this journey, just like water does. And I also,
That's true. That's good.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but I realize we've probably gone further than we thought we
Oh
may
no, it's
already.
lovely. It's, well, because I'm a permaculture designer, right? And so part of there's a real hydrological component to that, which is sort of slowing. You learn that water is always on its journey back to the ocean. Wherever water is on the planet, it's on its way back to the ocean, right? So part of making sure that your property is watered is using things like swales, and understanding the movement of water and your relationship to the sea, because that's going to determine how water moves through your property, and so on. So it teaches that as well. Like, wherever you are on that journey back to the source anyway.
Absolutely. And even the glass of water that you might be about to drink. So often what we do is we think of water and we think, oh, well, it's going to, quench my thirst. It washes my body. It takes my waste away. It washes the clothes. But actually, that glass of water you're about to drink, firstly, thing we never think about, it's about to become part of you.
Yeah.
But then also, what you're about to drink, firstly, we don't even know where it came from. Secondly, it has been through the trees, the clouds, your ancestors, the cows, everything. It's already been through everything, and now it's about to go through you and become you. So firstly, there's the environment that you want it to enter, and also what information might it have to share with you, and are you ready to receive it? I think we're all like liquid antennas, really, receiving information from all, constantly. And so it is very interesting to just start being reminded that even the water that you're drinking is so ancient, has so much wisdom and information to share, And it becomes, like you've mentioned a few times, you know, it becomes kind of like ceremony, this sacred relationship. And it comes down to the ancients and the indigenous people all along have been saying that water is essentially a living being.
Yeah.
And what is it? What kind of relationship do we want to form with it and with ourselves?
Wonderful. Well, Veda, tell us about the book and where people can get it, because this has been the most, I've loved this. This has been great.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited because it's been so long with all of my work, but it's just been published. It's being, the release is I think the 6th of April, but people can pre-order. Either you can go to my website, which is my name, Veda Austin, VedaAustin.com, and also it'll be, you can go to Amazon or just Google The Secret Intelligence of Water is the name of the book. And I've got a Facebook page, and I've just started Instagram. I'm like so slow on the uptake, but they're just starting to like, so anyone wants to like follow me on there, I'm pretty new. And yeah, I think those are all the likely
Brilliant.
places, and I'll share a link with you as well. You can add.
No, absolutely. This will all be in the show notes. Well, again,
you know what else?
Oh yeah.
One thing, real quick, that people always ask me, and after doing Tom's show, it was the #1 question. It's like, how do you do the work? So anyone that buys the book actually will get a copy of a step-by-step guide that I put together to teach you how to do my technique. Because I want, so many people said to me, and they were very well-meaning, but please don't share it, monetize it, blah, blah, blah. And that never sat with me. Personally, I want everyone in the world to be able to play with water, form a relationship, and it shouldn't be a secret. I think that this is important work that other people should have the chance to play with as well.
The open secret intelligence of water. Yeah, exactly. It's true. Like, because if you do this, I mean, I'm sure people have been as astounded by these images as I was when I saw them on Tom's show, but if you can move into a ceremonial relationship with water yourselves by doing this, by doing something like this, you will never think the same about water again. And that, I mean, you know, permaculturalist, environmentalist, whatever, that's great, because we are not in right relation with water, right? So the more people who can come to an awareness of what water may truly be, the better it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice one. Well, once again, thank you very much. And yeah, a great chat.
Thanks so much. See you later.